All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy day to attend this roundtable. My name is Dieter Schuler. I'm the president of Quick Launch. I've been working in the identity and access management space for a very long time. And one of the things that I've seen is that identity and access management has kind of percolated to becoming a priority for many of the higher education institutions that I've been talking to. I think everyone knows the value of identity and access management when it comes to security, but I think the industry is still starting to understand the importance of this when it comes to business value. So when you look beyond security and you look at things like user experience, enrollment, engagement, student retention, compliance, and what that means from a business perspective, even things like reduction in license costs and more effective use of human resources, which are always the most expensive component of almost any organization. But also things like improved communication. And we'll go through some examples of all of these, right? And then in general, right, business enablement and agility, right? What the industry has started to figure out is that the perimeter is gone and identity has become the new perimeter. And so if you're not paying attention to identity, not only do you not have security, but you are not able to accomplish the business things that you want to accomplish in a very effective way, because identity always becomes that project within a project that you didn't anticipate, that you're now spending time doing for every single other initiative that you've got. So what I'd like to do as a next step is introduce our panel. And I believe that John Mazariegos, who's the Chief Information Officer of National Louis, had a conflict, so he was not able to make it. But I'd like to introduce Brian Cornell. Brian is the CISO for Oculus IT, as well as Jim von Landengem. Jim, did I get that right? Am I close? All right.
Yeah, close enough, thanks.
Jim is a principal IAM architect at Moran Technology Consulting Group. And then Carl Horvath, who's the president of the Campus Consortium Foundation. And what I'd like to do to start off this roundtable is have each one of the panelists introduce themselves and then kind of share with us for 5 to 7 minutes what they have learned in terms of the value of identity, as well as some stories about what they've seen with their institutions or their customers in terms of how they're utilizing this very effectively, right? The other thing that I've seen as kind of a parting comment is it's very difficult sometimes for CIOs, IT directors, even people with IAM titles to make a sound business justification for this over other priorities, because people just don't understand enough about what it is, right? So one of the things that we can do to help you as part of this panel is help you kind of put together the business justification. All right. We're also going to be announcing 3 things at the end of this session. One is we are offering, as part of this, to anyone that's interested, an IAM assessment. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what the value of that is. Through cooperation with Campus Consortium, we're also offering an in-kind grant that will help pay for a significant portion of the first-year investment in any identity and access management that people want to make. And then finally, what we've seen is that there is a lack of focus in the higher ed on a community that kind of can talk about this stuff, right? So we decided that we're going to take this roundtable and have regular meetings once a quarter and create what I would call the Identity and Access Management User Group for Higher Education. So congratulations to everyone that's attending, whether you know it or not. You're now part of the inaugural Higher Education Identity and Access Management User Group meeting. We'll talk more about details and what we're planning on doing with that, but I think there's a need in the market for a community that is focused on identity and access management, right? Lots of these about security, not a lot of these about identity and access management. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, have Brian introduce himself and talk a little bit about his experience with identity and access management and what he's learned that hopefully will get the conversation started.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dieter. Thank you to everyone in the audience for taking your time to join us today. I'm Brian Cornell. I serve as a CISO for Oculus IT. We are a managed security service provider. We focus on providing services and resources to the education industry. But in my career, which is well over 20 years, I've been a CIO and CISO. I've been in government. I've been at corporate, for profit. I've been CISO at a large bank. But yet, recent days, it's been more primarily focused on higher ed. But it doesn't matter what industry or sector you belong to or what kind of organization you are. One common trend that we see, whether it's hospitality, it's in government, medical, doesn't matter, is the continued increase in cyber attacks and data breaches. These attacks, we know about them. They're increasingly sophisticated, and unfortunately, they're very, very effective. These malicious threat actors continue this pursuit to cause issues and exfiltrate our data. They're not in there just to disrupt services. Okay, your printing operations are down, or your Wi-Fi is going to be offline for a few days. They want our trade secrets. They want data. These people are trying to gain power and empowerment over your institution and organization. The attacks that are targeting the end user remain the number one tactic providing successful entry into your environment. It bypasses all your safeguards, all your controls. You can have the best security program in the world with the largest team and budget, but we know that end users and humans, we make mistakes. These kind of attacks, phishing, smishing, session hijacking, credential harvesting, they're endless. They continue to hit us and plague our environments. And there's many organizations, that are looking to counter these kind of attacks, with defensive tactics of their own, whether it be security training, patching, password management, introducing policies, just name several. But the same thing is in common. The exploit to one's identity to gain unauthorized access is what is the number one risk to any institution. And here comes IAM as a solution, identity access and management. In across the nation, again, doesn't matter any industry or what industry or sector you belong to, there's a very high need to manage the security of our users. And there's lots of pieces to IAM. You're going to hear a lot about more of it, but it touches on some, but not all. Account management, user access reviews, authorization and permissions, whether the onboarding of employees, the complete life cycle of account management to the offboarding of your employees. But the issue is there's a lack of understanding on an IAM solution. A lot of people think IAM, they think MFA, but there's a lot more than that, and the need is a lot more than MFA. And again, that struggle for many, and this is what I see in the higher education sector, some are very, very good, but there are some that just don't have a complete understanding of what IAM should be and what it would look like in their organization. And this is challenging. It's challenging when people are seeking a proper solution and partner. Where do you begin? Some of the issues and challenges, specifically are, lacking of skill sets, not having the time to properly implement and optimize a solution. Just using one piece of a solution, isn't going to be, the best, for security and keeping your environment safe. And a lot of people just don't know where to begin. So how do we solve this? The first step is kind of what we're doing here in this webinar, is increasing our knowledge and awareness of different solutions that are out there. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Do you even understand your current environment? We can set out on this kind of a quest alone, and many people try, but they balk because it's a massive undertaking. And we also may be missing some key components of any kind of effective IAM solution. We don't know everything, and there's many people that are not experts in IAM, across the big organization like higher ed. Higher ed has faculty, they have staff, they have part-time employees, some of them have state employees, union workers, there's alumni, there's parents, there's guests, there's board of trustees, and there's many, many different systems there, and there's many, many different needs. And there's many other institutions, think of a hospital. There's patients, there's guests, there's the doctors, there's the providers, you name it, it's there. So we know some of this, but it's not always clear where to begin. And to get a good handle on this and to start pursuing the need for an effective IAM solution, my biggest recommendation is to try to understand your environment and then seek a partner. Seek a partner that is knowledgeable in the area, a vendor, and work with them and take their guidance and learn about the solutions that are out there and see if it's going to match some of your needs. And I think when you tap into the skill sets of others that are out there in groups like this, I think that it'll start becoming more clear for you. It'll paint a better picture for you. And then you would be able to move forward because you would know what you need. And then you would be able to find a partner and a solution that you could bring to your organization and environment to help improve security. Because in the end users are going to continue to be targeted. And if I get your account, I now have access, unauthorized access into the environment. And I think we need to do collectively across the board, we need to do better on improving the safety and security of our end users and their identity.
So, Brian, one question for you. In your experience, especially with higher ed, what have you seen in terms of the maturity level for many of these organizations when it comes to identity and access management?
What I see is, yeah, of course, there are some schools that would be at the very high spectrum of maturity, and they've been working on it for a long time. What I see most often, unfortunately, are just very little small pieces of IAM implemented, not everything that is needed. And then a lot of people, if you go back to their IT strategic plan 5 years ago, it mentions IAM. If you look at their current strategic plan and the current projects, it mentions IAM. What's stopping them from getting to where they need to go? And I think it's those things I listed. It's the knowledge, the lack of resources. This is a huge undertaking. And that's why I think, seeking a partner that can help assist and guide and be there side by side is the way to go. It's a top recommendation for pushing this out.
So one thing I'd like to do before we introduce Jim, Adam, if we could run a quick survey, and we promise not to call you out, but I'd like to get a sense for the attendees here. Where are you guys in terms of what I would call your IAM maturity level? Adam, are you able to quickly run that survey? All right.
Yeah.
So here's the question, right? How would you rate your identity and access management maturity level? Right, pick one, right? You haven't started, you're at kind of your initial stages, you've got it well defined and are on your way, you've implemented, but you still need to kind of optimize, or you've got everything that you need and your ongoing optimization is kind of where you're at. We'll give you guys a couple minutes to respond to this, and then we will again show in terms of percentages the results, but we're not going to call anyone out, especially those of you that are at level 0 or level 1. We'll give you another 15 or 20 seconds to answer this. All right, Adam, are we able to show the results? All right, so 33% of you are at the initial stage. 17% have defined, but not fully implemented. 33% of you have implemented, and 17% of you are, pretty much at ongoing optimization level. All right, so it's in line with what I have seen on the commercial sector. And it's certainly in line with what I've seen in terms of my conversations with higher ed institutions. Let's see, for those of you that are level 1 or level 2, let's see how we can get you to the next level. We're going to turn it over now to Jim. Jim, if you could take a few minutes and kind of show us what you've seen in the space, and any recommendations that you have would be appreciated as well.
Thanks, Dieter. Yeah, so as Dieter mentioned, I'm Jim Van Landeham, Principal IAM Architect with Moran Technology. Most of my career has focused on higher education. I started work as a work study at my local institution while attending classes, and kind of worked my way up over the years, until I kind of got bored and decided to get into consulting. So over the last, nearly 20 years, I have personally worked with over 100 different higher education focused clients. That includes colleges, universities, university and state systems, consortiums, teaching hospitals, research institutes, and others. So, based on our most recent experiences in the field with many of our clients, and I don't know if, are we going to the slides now then?
Yeah, so Adam will drive your slides for you, Jim. Just let him know when you want him to go to the first slide and next slide.
Yeah, so first slide, please, Adam. All right, so I just want to kind of discuss how higher education is changing, kind of germane to the topic of this roundtable, and discuss, how those changes impact identity and access management, and also raise awareness about how IAM is transforming the digital experience. You can go to the next one, Adam. So as I started to say, based on our most recent experiences, if you can skip the slide forward. So we're starting to see some well-established and emerging patterns or disruptors in higher education. And then they're having a real major impact on the industry as a whole, but more specifically, these disruptors are affecting the technologies we use to provide identities and the access required to teach, learn, and conduct research. The chart on the right, it kind of shows how there's been the enrollment. I'm sure everybody in higher ed has been talking about that, right? There's a lot of changes happening in the market, and there's a lot of movement in trying to establish new programs to help deal with that, right? There's many higher education institutions experiencing that issue with shrinking enrollment, and obviously it's compounded by fierce competition, decreased funding, not to mention some of the societal changes in the last few years, like the normalcy of hybrid and remote learning and working, the increasing demand for, an internet native perspective on the user experience. People are expecting a better and more seamless experience because that's what they get from their corporations and their banks. There's also kind of eroding perceptions of the value of higher education. So there's been an increased focus on degree programs that are, non-degree certificates, stuff like that. So on top of that, there's also capital and regulatory stresses kind of forcing institutions to adopt more complex solutions to satisfy the requirements from like cyber insurance providers. And there's new privacy regulations. Look at the GLBA, thing that happened, and everybody's trying to get GLBA compliant. Like there's all these forces that are forcing schools to respond. And like I said, they're doing this by expanding non-traditional things like certificate programs, focusing more on 100% online offerings, and intensifying focus on research for some of the bigger schools. And they're all doing this intentionally to try to offset that loss in enrollment from the traditional student. So, some schools are even, turning to more extreme measures like reducing overhead and redundancy, or, even going as far as establishing new consortiums or consolidating IT resources to become more competitive. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in essence, responses to these changes in higher education landscape. And this is like a pattern we're seeing in how, IAM is really changing, especially in higher ed, and is that the landscape is changing and it's predicated on utilizing technology to solve these problems. And so these complex and emerging trends are placing, an increasing burden on IT to adapt and support the organization's needs with more and more complex technologies. And, initiatives spawned by these needs tend to include things like more complex business practices that need modernized ERP deployment. And that requires, more and more flexible and efficient identity, data, and access management. Removing barriers and obstacles from and streamlining student recruitment often requires identifying and tracking people and their actions sooner through CRM modernization and customer IAM initiatives. The need to offer a course to a learner that can pay for it and take it right away requires a transaction-based real-time identity provisioning engine. And, privacy regulations and inclusivity initiatives change requirements for how people can manage their own identities and grant consent for how that information is used. And providing everything a person needs on their first day requires a rationalized approach to access governance designed to be easily understood. And, growth in research also requires increased collaboration and real-time provisioning for people that may or may not be in the ERP system. So like, I don't know if you see the pattern I'm trying to get at here, but what I'm saying is that like, as much as IAM is deprioritized today, what people don't really recognize is that it is central and core to almost every single major improvement initiative that is very common to different universities today. So by denying, funding or resources into identity and access management, you're shooting yourself in the foot with the rest of your transformational, impactful initiatives. Next slide, please. So, I guess the point of this is to assert that responding to changes in the higher education sector with new ideas, new business, and new technologies, it requires a mature program. The technology and the solutions for identity governance and administration, SIAM, identity and access management, single sign-on, all these products are certainly key, right? Because, as both Brian and Dieter already mentioned, right, this is the new security boundary, identity. So, I don't want to take away from the point that the technology is very important, but I also think, that you can't really have a successful solution implementation without a continuous improvement program, because if you don't, not only you're unlikely to achieve transformational impact, you're going to, limit yourself and your capability to respond to some of these bigger strategic initiatives. So, I'm asserting that spending the time to understand the greatest needs of your most critical stakeholders, the students, the faculty, the staff, practitioners, researchers, whoever you have there, and collaborating with business stakeholders and aligning those needs will lead to the need for IAM technologies. So working together from a holistic perspective with that broader community to ensure that full understanding of those needs and, kind of create a push and pull relationship that's healthy enough to consider process changes that will enable a more data-driven approach to IAM is conducive to all those transformational initiatives. And then defining those boundaries and enforcing them with policy, not just to ensure you're able to execute your mission, but to limit, how much customization you're putting into your system is also important. So I guess in conclusion, I'll just say that all that equates to the fact that IAM can really and truly either be your biggest blocker to your modernization initiatives, or, it can be an agent for digital transformation, and it just depends on how you approach it.
Yeah, Jim, one of the things that you point out that I think we'd like to see some examples of as we go through the rest of this conversation is it's sometimes difficult to make the connection between business initiatives and the identity and access management infrastructure that is required and that underlies that and that is mission critical for that, right? People look at this from a security perspective and say, can identity and access management make me more secure? And the answer is absolutely, right? But can it also enable my business? Can it also make it a better user experience? How do I quantify that? And how do I make that connection? One thing, guys, in terms of logistics, if you have questions for the panelists, please put them into the chat, and we'll start to, as we go through the rest of the section, make sure that we get those questions answered. Next, I'd like to introduce Carl Horvath. Carl is the president of Campus Consortium Foundation. He's been doing this a long time, and he's seen the importance of identity and access management percolate up. So he's going to share with you kind of his thoughts.
Thank you, Dieter. My name is Carl. I'm president of the Campus Consortium Foundation. I'm a longtime vice president of IT and chief information officer and chief operations officer in multiple organizations. Started out in the for-profit, but spent the last couple decades in higher education. Worked for large R1 institutions to small privates. So it's been a great journey. But I have to say the one thing that is the difference, before I started at Campus Consortium in 2020, is I clearly saw that the R1 university had all the tools that were necessary to operate. But when you get to the small privates or the smaller schools, they need all those same tools, but they don't have the same resources and they don't have the same funding. So how do they get that? The legacy method of supporting technology doesn't work anymore when schools have used internal resources, hired their own people, hosted their own systems. That is just not sustainable today. And so what I'm hearing from Dieter, Brian, and Jim is a call to rethink how higher education especially has been providing technology services for their students, faculty, and staff. And I think a lot of the ideas here are good ones. I'd like to just speak to a little bit about what I've seen since I've been president of all the educational institutions from across the country that we work with and talk with, what their views are. And I think you've heard a lot of them from all three previous speakers, but if you could go to the next slide, please. So we've talked about this. This is a fundamental slide that I use, and to Jim's point, when he's saying don't just look at IAM as technology, and I think not just IAM, but technology in general. A lot of leadership in many institutions is viewed as perhaps something they don't understand or would like to have somebody else be responsible for. And so many times the real value of technology is not leveraged in the institution. And it can empower the institution and the campus community. And so I try to meet with especially presidents and senior leaders of higher education to have a non-technical discussion about all of technology so they can strategically use this to advance their institution. I don't know if it was Jim or Brian. I think it was Jim that was saying institutions are struggling and suffering and they're starting consortiums, but we're also hearing about a lot of institutions that are going out of business. Unfortunately, they're struggling, they're merging with others, and some of this can be prevented by strategically using IT to address a lot of what Jim mentioned previously, which is societal changes and also the flexibility, the hybrid, the work from home. All these are fundamental changes, as well as there's a number of initiatives on free education, which hurts some of the strategies of the institutions that are charging tuition. So all that to say that there needs to be some improvements and that education has to catch up to where for-profit, where corporations, where Amazon, Zappos, and other online stores have been already. The problem is funding, expertise, And that is not available in many institutions. And it is possible to get that, though. And as all three speakers have said, it's working with the right advisor to help you move it ahead in your institution. Next slide, please. So these are the four areas that we talk about. And this is mostly with CIOs. If I'm talking to CEOs, CFOs, or sometimes board of trustees, I don't use these words. I change these descriptions and remove the acronyms and speak about it from a perspective that they can identify with, that affects or impacts them, but either personally or professionally, so they really understand the value of identity and access management. So it is definitely a security tool. It does protect data. It protects systems and resources, but it brings many other benefits too. Next slide, please. So it's more than just tech, and it automates processes, creating accounts and removing accounts when someone leaves the institution. This has been put together by some rock star IT folks back in the late 90s or early 2000s. They create a script that creates accounts, and it has to be updated manually, the script. And in some cases, institutions have scripts that are hundreds of pages of code that the person that created them is no longer there. Needless to say, this can be a problem, especially when students are enrolling and becoming students. You really need an automated process to make that go smoothly and quickly. So we're providing the service and meeting the expectations of what today's students want. And other areas such as data entry errors can be avoided or significantly reduced in terms of the security and compliance, lowers the risk. And Brian or Jim was talking about cyber insurance for sure. They are looking for controls in place that will directly affect an institution's insurance premiums. There is GLBA, there is GDPR, there are many different other areas such as PCI DSS that are compliance requirements, and making sure that people are in the right roles and don't inherit. If a new registrar comes to a campus and somebody says, oh, that's the new registrar, let's just give them the registrar account. Well, the old registrar was there for 25 years and had access to many different areas and systems of the institution, as well as highly sensitive data that didn't need to be shared with the new registrar. So zero trust and building access as needed is very important. But also, aside from allowing people to do things or not do things that join the institution, data governance is also part of this. So a good data governance plan. Many institutions have distributed content in multiple systems. I've seen student information with social security numbers uploaded to an unprotected Google account that should never have been there. And various other methods now with of distributing information, unprotected information. And this is very easy to fix with a lot of what Brian Cornell does, which is assess and advise on how to protect and centralize information, minimize the data footprint of the institution. And this does result in lower costs, higher protection, and a less possibility that the institution will be shut down because of a breach or ransomware or some other issue. Next slide, please. So in the end, in my discussions, advising and trying to help senior leaders understand the value of identity and access management is that it really is an efficiency exercise in the institution, and it also does wind up saving money. And I think Dieter and Brian had mentioned that too. So very important to and make sure that there is planning in advance of implementing an IAM solution. And this is best done, again, as everybody is saying, with an advisor that you trust. Next slide, please. So in terms of higher education specifically, there are challenges, has been identified by the previous presenters. And I just want to highlight 3 of them that keep coming up in all my meetings with our member institutions and institutions outside of Campus Consortium. And that is, they have such a rapid turnover of users. There are, education is seasonal work, and a lot of end users turnover, not just every year, but multiple times a year. And keeping track of that is significant work, and a manual process is not always the best. Typically, other organizations don't have that high of a turnover. Also, there are multiple user types. Well, yes, many organizations have multiple users. It is unusually high in the education space because of all the collaborations, the research work, the vendors, the partnerships. That means there are many identities and accounts that have to be created and managed. Also, when students graduate, and if an institution gives them an account as an alumni to stay connected, it's easy to lose track of some of these. And so all these accounts have to be monitored. And finally, just the nature of higher education, open and democratic environment. We do not want to impinge on academic freedom or the sharing of knowledge. And so we don't always put the controls in that a corporation or a for-profit business might have to protect their assets. Next slide, please. And so I have just 3 quick slides on the market of education and identity and access management. And some of these have been identified by our previous speakers, but certainly online learning, e-learning, remote learning, we're turning education upside down, and we are reinventing it. So there's a lot of work that's happening. There's a lot of work that's happening that depends on technology. Although 10 years ago or 15 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, we could not count on complete technology as our tool for the job. Today, we depend entirely on technology, and it really will shut a business down if we are not operating it effectively. We also have restraints in education, which is the awareness issue. So education, very important. Of course, the financial constraints, and then institutional resistance to change. And so there has to be a lot of work. And this is where Campus Consortium helps schools around cultural acceptance to technology. Next slide, please. Finally, the opportunities, and I'm sure our speakers will talk more about this. That is the biometrics, passwordless, the data privacy that IAM helps the institution manage. And as everyone has said, collaborating with the right provider to make sure you get the right solution for your institution. And together, let's work on this. I'm very excited about this group, this roundtable, and moving forward, working together with all of you to advance education. Thank you.
Carl, you bring up one really interesting point, which is multiple user types. What I'm seeing is it's not just multiple user types, but it's the same person that can be
Right.
multiple user types, right? So you have somebody who's an applicant, then they become a student, then they become an employee because they're working at the cafeteria, or they're a TA, then they become an alumni, then they become a student again because they're a grad student. You know, for those universities that have medical facilities, they might even be a patient, right? There's just so many different user types for the same person that make it very difficult for higher ed to kind of keep track of, you know, who is this person really, and in what capacity am I working with them?
100%. It's so distributed, and I'm glad you brought that up. So a lot of what we do sometimes is data governance, exploration, helping schools bring together their data, centralize it, protect it, tag it on what it is. This is PII, personally identifiable information. Oh, this is public, so that doesn't need the same protection. But let's centralize it because there's 5 versions of this same document or data. Let's get it down to one that everybody can share. I've been at meetings with these data governance meetings where I have one department on one side of the table, department head, another one on the other side. So let's say it's financial aid and the registrar and advancement. All of them are using similar data, but no one knows that the other one has what they've been looking for. And the last item with these exercises is a lot of these meetings I go into and they think, oh, there's one definition of student. So exactly what you said, Dieter, could be 15 or 20 definitions of student, and depends on the business process and who's using it.
All right, let's open it up for questions and discussion. Before we do that, we do have one question for the group. We'd like to know from your perspective, based on what you've experienced so far and maybe what you've heard today, where do you see the biggest benefit in implementing IAM within your organization? Is it from a security perspective? Is it from a business agility perspective, user experience, cost savings? I'm sure there's other categories that we've missed, but if you could pick one of these just to kind of get a sense for where everybody's at, that would be helpful. We'll wait about 15 seconds. While we're doing that, I'll go ahead and answer a bunch of the questions that have come in on the chat. First question is, will these slides be sent out after the webinar? The answer is yes. We'll make sure everyone gets a copy of the slides. Second question is, are there any plans on introducing identity and access management to SMBs and enterprises? I'll speak for Quick Launch, and then maybe others can jump in as well. Quick Launch has historically been focused on the higher education space. And what we have found is that space in many ways is relatively unique, right? So for example, if you really want to serve higher ed, you really have to understand all of the different systems that are unique to them, right? Not only the student information system, but the LMS, the portal, many other systems that you don't really see in what I would call the commercial space. So this is where we've put our effort and focus, and we've gotten really good at that. At some point, I'm sure we'll expand into IAM and into SMB and enterprises, but that's not something that we're going to do in the very short term. Let's go ahead, Adam, and take a look at the survey results, and then we'll open it up to discussion. All right, so everybody right now is looking at IAM from a security perspective, with the exception of 25% user experience, right? What's interesting is nobody is really looking at this from a business agility perspective or a cost savings perspective. So I would love to hear from the panelists, and maybe I'll get it started, right? Some examples. So the next question, and again, please feel free to unmute yourself. Adam, if we could unmute everyone that would like to be unmuted and jump into this conversation, right? We'd love to hear from you if you have questions or if you have comments. But one of the questions is, okay, so give me some examples, right? I'll provide one that's a user experience example, and then I'll ask the rest of the panel to kind of chime in and explain what they've seen, and anyone else that has worked this can feel free to chime in as well. So I was talking to an institution last week where they told me that they have, their typical student has 5 different user IDs and passwords. So you can break that down. You can say, well, wait a minute, is it really 5 IDs, or is it really 1 ID and 5 different passwords? Because you have different password policies in all the systems they want to get to, right? They have to get to Active Directory because that's where their email is. They have to get to the LMS. They have to get to the student information system, et cetera, right? But even if it's 1 ID and 5 different passwords, right? That's still a hell of a lot for a user to remember, right? Even if it's 1 ID and 1 password, that's still 5 different prompts that they get when they go to these different resources, right? So you can reduce the user experience by giving them one ID, one password, right? And that can be very secure, right? It may not even have to be a password if you've got MFA integrated into this. And most importantly, right, they're not prompted multiple times for who they are, right? But it goes beyond that even, right? So student experience also means, hey, I went to my LMS and I'm not able to do what I need to do there because I don't have the right access, right? I can sign in, but they didn't put me in the right group or they didn't give me the right role. And so I can't get to what I'm supposed to get to. That's a problem for me. That's a bad experience. So here's a good example, right, of where by implementing identity and access management, you can make that a much more frictionless experience, right, and improve. And it's hard to quantify that from a business perspective, but I'll guarantee you, right, students that have a good experience stay engaged. Students that stay engaged stay enrolled, right, and it trickles on. Jim, Brian, Carl, other examples?
I just have a quick one, Dieter, and that is we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, and that is that process that many schools have where they're using an old script, and there's a big disconnect between either the admissions department or the human resources department getting information over to IT to have accounts created. And there are delays with onboarding new employees and students. There are delays in giving access to students to, I need to get into my learning management system, as you said, ASAP. Well, how long's my account? When is it going to be available and when can I access it? Oh, that'll be a couple days, but we'll get it done for you soon. So right there, that efficiency, the customer service experience for students is dramatically improved. But beyond that, we've seen so many savings in help desk tickets because of the improved process, and also the people that were following up and doing all the manual work with provisioning and deprovisioning accounts and following up with HR and saying, oh, this student get access or this employee can't get to this, so they can't help the students. A lot of that goes away. And now I've seen many instances of employees that have been able to be redirected to the core business process and do hands-on with the institution. So absolutely saves because the new employees don't have to be invested in, and you improve the service.
Yeah, and I would add that it's not just password resets in terms of the help desk, right? It's also calls about access, right? I may remember my password, but I still may not be able to get access to things. And the primary reason for that, Carl, as you pointed out, is students and to a large extent, even faculty and employees, right, don't get provisioned the right way or into the right accounts, right? So they got an account in the LMS, but they're not in the right group. Because they're not in the right group, they can't do all the things that they're supposed to do. And so it becomes a help desk issue from that perspective. Carl, you also mentioned GLBA and cyber insurance, right? I'd love to hear from you or the rest of the panel what your experience has been in terms of the connection between IAM and some of those things.
I would just like to refer very quickly to what I think Brian has a great story or two about this, but I know that we've had experience working with 2 schools that were paying not just the highest premium that was available for cybersecurity insurance, but they had to go to a special carrier because they couldn't get regular cybersecurity insurance. And so they wound up paying double the highest rate, but they had to have it. And they had to have it for all those compliance reasons, financial aid and regulations and all kinds of, reasons why they had to overspend. And in the end, when we did a quick analysis on business controls in their environment, we found very low-hanging fruit in terms of fixes that could be in place. And once those fixes were in place, the insurance carrier did reevaluate their environment, and their rates not only went to the highest normal rate, but it dropped below that. And with their continued work in automating roles and protecting them and ensuring that there's zero trust and they only can access what they need to. I've been following these two schools particularly for the past year. They're going in for another reduction in their premium. So yes, compliance is so important.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Go ahead, Brian.
yeah, so this is Jim. I was just going to add to, the kind of examples you were talking about, and one of those being business agility, which I thought, was interesting that nobody voted for that. But, I think probably one of the most extreme examples I can think of for that is a university I was working for, was about a top 50 research institution in the country. And, they had onboarding and access management processes that were, to Carl's point, had some pretty extreme delays to it. And, that those delays, I mean, they meant that, you couldn't get access to what you needed to do until you were on the job for up to 2 weeks before you actually had everything you needed to do your job. And so we came in and we started talking to one of the teaching hospitals under this university. And they said, well, for about the past 3 years, we've been giving our practitioners, hiring them so that we could give them accounts, but not requiring them to show up for work for 2 weeks so that they could have an account created. And then that way they could go through the access request process and make sure those practitioners had the access they needed by the time they were on site, because that was a legal liability for them to be there and not be able to provide care because they couldn't give access to the things that they needed. So, I'd say like maybe that's an extreme case, but business agility, right? Being able to support processes outside of the norm can be really important for higher education.
No, and Jim, if you want to talk about business agility, there's a fundamental principle that says any new application that comes in the door at your institution, right? If you don't have a solid identity and access management infrastructure, now you have a project to make sure that you get users into that application so that they can actually use the application, right?
Exactly.
Nobody thinks about that until the application is there and somebody says, well, wait a minute, how are people going to get to this thing? So that for me is a huge, example of business agility that is often overlooked.
Dieter.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna, first a couple thoughts, and I'll swing back to GLBA. But I'm not surprised myself from what I've seen as far as the poll questions being answered the way they were, and I think it does go back to the complete understanding of what the benefits of a good IAM solution would be and what it can do for you. I think traditionally they think, user access, create accounts, onboard, offboard, single sign-on MFA, but there is a lot more. And so I think some of it, if I made an assumption, would be just a lack of knowledge. And I think that IAM solutions have grown over time, and it's tough to keep up with them. As far as just another example in a challenge, when you're making accounts, not everything goes through the kickoff. Those old scripts were based on when HR adds a new employee in the enterprise system, it then triggers something to IT to make the account. What about a president or a senior leader that comes in as a consultant or from the registry? If you're familiar with the registry, clearly they're not paid by the university. Clearly they're not an employee. So how do you enter them in that system? And that leads to mistakes being done. That leads to fraud. That leads to accounts being there well past the day that person should have access. And then hitting on GLBA, IAM absolutely helps build GLBA compliance. The tracking of accounts, the monitoring of accounts, the ability and capability to audit such accounts, and look at what's happening in the environment, segregation of duty. How do you implement that, and how do you implement least privilege, and how do you centrally manage all of this? So yes, it absolutely does. And I think though, there's more to be learned about IAM to then understand it and what it can do for you.
Well, and Brian, you bring up a really good point, right? When the account doesn't get provisioned appropriately, it's a bad user experience. When the account doesn't get inactivated or deprovisioned appropriately, now you've got a potential security hole.
Yeah, in
Which
segregation
many
of
ways can be
duties.
even.
Yeah, there's many systems out there, and you can call them orphan systems, those not centrally managed. But hey, there's the environment that will lead to fraud. For example, you should not have access to prepare a payment and then authorize such payment. But that stuff's happened, and that leads to major fraud and a lot of fines and consequences for those, you know, that not even the financial implications, but just the fraud in general. So I think there's a lot more to understand here as people move forward and go on that quest.
I'm going to bring up one final one, and then we'll close it out because I want to be respectful of people's time. The one that really surprised me in terms of business benefits is communication. I was surprised by how many of the communication initiatives within higher ed institutions are based on, let's say, groups as an example, right? If you're in the right group, you get an email or you get communication through your portal or whatever it is, right? If you're in the wrong group, you don't get it, or sometimes even worse, right? If you're in a group that you're not supposed to be in, you get communication that is sensitive that you're not supposed to have, right? So if you've got a good handle on this, right, I would argue, based on what I've seen so far, that you can significantly improve. And it's hard to put a value on this, right? But intuitively, you can significantly improve your communication by having a solid identity and access management infrastructure. So let me leave everyone with three thoughts, right? So hopefully this was valuable for you. And hopefully we will be able to, as part of this, help to create a community. So I'd like to do three things. I would like to explain very quickly what we're offering in terms of an IAM assessment. I'd like to explain very quickly what we're offering in terms of an in-kind grant to help fund some of this if you're having budget issues or having trouble getting it funded. And then I would also like to talk about the IAM user group that this roundtable is going to turn into, because I think there's an opportunity to kind of serve that through this roundtable or through this group. So number one, Adam, if you go to the next slide, let's talk about the IAM assessment. We've done this with a number of our customers, and I think it's been very helpful for them. We've done two things, right? One, and this is a very detailed one. The one that we'll do will probably be a little bit less detailed, but we've done what I would call a capability heat map, right? Where we look at all of the things that are related to identity and access management, and we kind of rate them as red, yellow, blue, or green, and kind of show you where your exposure is and where your risk is and where you're naked compared to what you think you should be doing. All right, and then the second thing we'll do, if you go to the next slide, is help you to identify based on three vectors, right? The priority, the business value, and the level of complexity and effort, right? Where you should spend your time, where your lowest hanging fruit is, right? So that's number one. That's the IAM assessment. Number two, and Carl, feel free to jump in if you've got things that you'd like to cover now in more detail. But we are offering an in-kind grant in conjunction with the Campus Consortium Foundation. If you're interested in finding out more about that, you can just respond to the poll that Adam has put together now. And then Carl and I will reach out and we'll give you details on that. The third thing is, Carl, anything else on that?
No. You said it perfectly, and I think we're pretty excited about that collaboration because it will make identity and access management accessible for a lot of institutions.
Great. So if any of you are interested in either of these, please feel free to respond to the poll. We'd appreciate it if you could respond anyway, even if you're not. The final thing I want to talk about is in my past life, there were a number of what I would call identity and access management conferences that were national, that were awesome, but people had a hard time traveling to those. And so what we did is we created some local IAM user groups, and then when COVID hit, we made them virtual. And what we found is that we were filling a very strong need in the market, right? Because not everyone can travel, and not everyone has budget for that. So for example, right, and these user groups, by the way, are still going on today, right? In Chicago, there's about 50 people that attend. This is an example of the next one that's coming up, I think on May 16th. So what I would like to do is turn this roundtable into an IAM user group where we start by meeting 4 times a quarter. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 6th, and we're looking for presenters. And what we'll typically do is have 2 schools kind of present their journey, right? Where they are, where they want to be, what they've learned, the mistakes they've made, if they were able to share that, and then open it up for discussion. The idea ultimately is to make these in-person meetings and to do them around the country at schools that are willing to host these. But you will get more information about these. If anyone is interested in presenting at the next one, please feel free to reach out to me. And we'll talk about what a valuable presentation would be to the rest of the community. So with that, we're 1 minute over. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I really appreciate everyone jumping in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.